My name is Mackenzie and I am 29 years old. I emptied my entire savings account to buy a flooded-out boarding kennel on the edge of town, the kind of place that had been condemned since the ice storm took the roof off in 2019. The day I signed the papers at the credit union, my mother looked at me like I'd told her I was joining a cult. My older brother didn't even bother hiding his laugh. He said I'd just thrown away the only inheritance I was ever going to see, that I was a hopeless case who'd be living off Kraft dinner for the rest of my life. They thought they'd finally put me in my place, that pushing me out of the family business had left me with nothing but a moldy building full of rotted dog runs. But 6 days later, what I found behind the false wall in the old grooming room left every single one of them speechless. That moldy building turned out to hold the one thing standing between my family and the empire they thought they already owned. Before I get into it, let me know in the comments what province you're watching from. And if you've ever had a family try to write you off and got the last laugh, hit subscribe, because you are going to want to hear exactly how this played out. I grew up just outside Barrie, Ontario, in a house where the rules were never written down, but everyone understood them perfectly. My brother Connor got the benefit of the doubt for everything. I got the benefit of nothing. My father Wade had built Heartling Logistics from a single delivery van into a regional trucking and warehousing company that moved freight for half the distribution centers between Toronto and North Bay. It was the kind of business built on long hours, harder handshakes, and the belief that sentiment didn't belong anywhere near a balance sheet. For 3 years I worked as the company's operations coordinator. I'm talking 60-hour weeks, missed Thanksgivings, a phone that buzzed at midnight because a load had been held up at the border crossing in Sarnia and somebody needed to reroute 6 trucks before the customs window closed. I was the one who rebuilt our entire dispatch system after we lost the Canadian Tire distribution contract 2 years running. I renegotiated our fuel contracts when diesel prices spiked and saved the company close to $400,000 in a single year. My father had told me more than once, sitting right across from me at his desk, that the VP of Operations title was mine. He said it in front of our accountant. He said it in front of my mother at Christmas dinner. I believed him, because why wouldn't I? The betrayal landed on a Wednesday morning in March, during our quarterly meeting with the board, which was really just my father, my uncle, and Connor pretending to understand a P&L statement. I walked in expecting to finally hear my own name attached to that title. Instead, my father cleared his throat and announced that Connor would be stepping into the VP role, effective immediately, because the company needed, in his words, a face that clients trust. Connor had been with the company 8 months. He spent most of those 8 months taking long lunches with vendors and posting pictures of himself standing in front of trucks he had never once driven. I sat there in that conference room with my laptop open to the dispatch dashboard I had built from scratch, and I said nothing because saying something had never once worked in that family. After the meeting, my father pulled me aside and told me, almost gently, that there would be other opportunities, that I should be patient, that family came first and I needed to trust the process. I drove home that night and didn't cry until I was sitting in my own driveway with the engine off. 3 weeks after that, my mother called to ask if I could cover the deposit for her and my father's anniversary dinner at the steak house downtown, just until payday, since apparently the company card had a billing issue. I put $600 I didn't have on my own credit card. Nobody paid me back. Nobody mentioned it again. I started looking at the classifieds out of sheer spite more than any real plan. That's how I found the kennel. It had been a boarding and grooming business once, run by an older couple who'd retired without selling it properly, and it had sat empty for almost 5 years after the storm damage. The listing photos were brutal: water stains across the ceiling tile, dog runs rusted through, a parking lot with grass growing through the cracks. The asking price was almost nothing because nobody in their right mind wanted it. I went to see it on a gray Saturday in April. The realtor warned me twice that the building probably needed to be gutted. I walked through anyway, past the old reception desk, into the back grooming room, where there was a strange section of wall that didn't quite match the rest, paneled in a cheap fake wood material that none of the other rooms had. I didn't think much of it that day. I was too busy doing math in my head trying to figure out if I could actually swing this. I emptied my TFSA. I cashed out what little was left of an RRSP I'd barely started. I sold my car and bought a used Civic with cash to free up more. By the time I sat down at the lawyer's office to sign the closing documents, I had exactly $11 left in my checking account. The lawyer actually laughed when I told her that, not unkindly, just surprised that anyone would cut it that close. I told my parents that weekend, mostly because I didn't want them hearing it secondhand from someone in town. My mother's first words were, "You did what with your savings?" My father didn't even look up from his phone. Connor, who'd shown up uninvited for Sunday dinner specifically I think to gloat about his new title, started laughing before I even finished the sentence. He said I'd officially outfailed myself, that buying a condemned dog kennel with my last dollar was the most pathetic thing he'd ever heard, and that I'd be begging Dad for a job again within the year. My father said, in that flat voice he used when he'd already decided not to care, that I'd made my bet. My mother didn't say anything else. She just looked at me with this expression, like I'd embarrassed her in front of people who weren't even there. I drove the hour back to the kennel that night instead of going home, because I didn't trust myself to be alone in my apartment with how I was feeling. I let myself in with the new key, walked through the dark building with my phone flashlight, and ended up standing in that grooming room again, staring at that strange section of wall. I started prying at the edge of the panel with a flathead screwdriver I kept in my glove box, half out of curiosity and half because I needed to break something that wasn't going to break me back. The panel came away easier than I expected. Behind it was a recessed steel door, the kind you'd see on a gun safe, with a combination dial and a keyhole underneath it. There was no reason on earth a failing dog kennel needed a hidden vault. None. I didn't sleep that night. I sat in my car in the parking lot until 2 in the morning, scrolling through old listing records, trying to find out who'd actually owned this property before the retired couple. It took me 3 days of digging through the county land registry office, and one very awkward conversation with a records clerk named Denise before I found the name. The kennel had originally been built on land that was severed, decades ago, from a much larger parcel that ran straight through what is now the Heartling Logistics distribution yard. My father's company had been leasing that exact strip of land for almost 20 years, paying a small access fee to a numbered holding company nobody had ever bothered identifying. Because the fee was so minor it never showed up as a line item worth questioning. I now owned the parcel that holding company controlled. I called a locksmith out of Aurelia, who specialized in older commercial safes, a man named Pat, who'd been doing this for 30 years and didn't ask questions he didn't need answered. It took him 4 hours and a small grinder to get through the original combination dial, since whatever records existed for the code had clearly died with whoever installed it. Behind that door wasn't cash or jewelry or anything dramatic, it was paper. Decades of original land surveys, an old severance agreement from 1987, and a legal easement document granting access rights across that exact strip of land to whatever entity controlled the kennel property. An easement that, as far as I could tell, my father's company had never actually secured for itself in writing. They'd been operating on a handshake understanding with the previous owners for 2 decades, an understanding that technically expired the moment ownership of that land changed hands. I sat on that floor for almost an hour just reading through everything, my hands actually shaking because I understood immediately what I was holding. Heartling Logistics' entire dispatch yard, the one I had personally redesigned to save the company $400,000, depended on trucks being able to cross that strip of land to reach the loading docks on the east side. Without legal access across my property, half their fleet couldn't physically get in or out. I didn't tell anyone right away. I spent the next month quietly consulting a property lawyer in Barrie named Priya, who confirmed everything I suspected and then some. The original access agreement had never been properly renewed when the previous owners retired. Legally, my father's company had been trespassing, in the gentlest possible legal sense, for the better part of 2 years already, and hadn't even realized it because nobody had ever bothered to enforce it. While I was working all of this out quietly, things at the kennel got strange. Someone broke the front windows twice in 1 month, which the local police chalked up to random vandalism, until the second time when whoever did it also spray-painted "Go Home" across the side of the building. I installed security cameras after the second break-in, mostly to satisfy my insurance company. 2 weeks later, The footage caught Connor's car sitting in the lot at 11 at night, parked just outside the camera's blind spot, until he apparently forgot the angle had changed since the last time he'd scoped the place out. I confronted him about it over the phone, and he didn't even bother denying it cleanly. He said something about how I had no business owning something that close to the family's operations, that I was being paranoid, that maybe I should sell the place back to the family for a fair price and stop playing games. I asked him how he even knew where the kennel was located. Since I'd never told him the address, he hung up. A week after that, my father's company tried to push through an emergency rezoning application with the township, the kind of move that would have let them build an alternate access road around my property entirely, cutting me out before I could ever act on the easement issue. I found out because Priya had a contact at the planning office who flagged it for her. The application listed Hartling Logistics as requesting the rezoning specifically because, and I'm paraphrasing the language, of anticipated access disruption from a neighboring property under new ownership. They knew. They'd known for weeks and said absolutely nothing to me, while my mother was still calling to ask if I was eating enough vegetables, and my father was telling people at the Rotary Club lunch that I was going through a phase. That's when I stopped trying to be patient. Priya helped me file a formal notice asserting my property rights and demanding either a properly negotiated, paid easement agreement or immediate cessation of unauthorized access across my land. We sent it by courier so there'd be no claiming it got lost in the mail. I drove past the dispatch yard that same afternoon and watched two of their trucks sitting motionless at the gate. Because the moment legal notice went out, their insurance carrier flagged the access dispute and froze their ability to keep using that route without massive liability exposure. My father called me 40 minutes later. It was the first time he'd called me directly in almost 2 months. He didn't ask how I was doing. He asked what I wanted. I told him I wanted exactly what I'd asked for in the notice. A fair, properly documented easement fee, paid monthly retroactive interest for the 2 years of undocumented use, and in writing, a formal acknowledgement that the original verbal agreement no longer applied. He told me I was being vindictive, that family didn't sue family, that I was punishing him for a business decision about the VP title that had nothing to do with any of this. I told him that decision had everything to do with this, because if he'd given me the title he promised, I wouldn't have needed to spend my last $11 proving I didn't need him. The rezoning application got pulled 2 days later, once their lawyer realized fighting it publicly would mean explaining in a township hearing why they'd been using my land without an agreement for 2 years. We settled. The easement fee alone, paid monthly, now covers more than I used to make in a year at that company, and that's before counting the retroactive payment that came through as a single lump sum that finally let me actually renovate the kennel properly. I reopened 6 months later as a full boarding and daycare facility, new roof, new runs, the whole thing rebuilt from the studs out. My mother showed up to the soft opening unannounced, standing awkwardly near the front desk like she expected to be told to leave. She didn't apologize, not really, not in so many words. She just said the place looked nice and asked if I needed help with the front desk on weekends, the same way she used to help out at Hartling before she stopped being useful to them too. Connor never showed up at all. I heard through my aunt that he's still at the company, still holding the VP title, though apparently it means a lot less now that half the operations budget goes toward the easement payments I negotiated. My father and I talk maybe once a month now, careful, polite conversations that never get too close to anything that matters. It's not the relationship I wanted, but it's mine, on my terms. The same way this building is mine, every rusted run and every square foot of land underneath it that they spent 20 years assuming would always just be theirs for free. Some mornings, I get to the kennel before sunrise to let the early boarders out into the yard, and I stand there in the cold with my coffee, looking at that strip of land my father's trucks used to cross like they owned it, and I think about $11. About how close that number was to nothing at all, and how it turned out to be exactly enough.